I'll never forget the moment my CEO, the man who once told me I should smile more to be approachable, had to step down in front of a room frozen in deadly silence. And it was all thanks to secret number 12. I'd been documenting in the shadows for 14 months, not to speak up, but to bring down the entire rotten empire they'd built on the silence of people like me. My name is Madeline Greer, and I was 32 when I walked into Dunlow and Holt Consulting for the first time, fresh from Austin with a master's degree and what I thought was thick skin. The glass building rose like a monument to corporate success in downtown Willow Creek, Colorado, all clean lines and reflective surfaces that caught the mountain light just right. The lobby smelled like expensive coffee and new leather. Everything gleamed, the marble floors, the chrome fixtures, the smiles of the receptionist who chirped, "Welcome to the D&H family," as she handed me my temporary badge. I remember thinking how perfect it all looked, how far I'd come from the cramped nonprofit offices where I'd started my career. My first week was a parade of orientation videos and team lunches where everyone seemed genuinely happy. The office had an open floor plan to encourage collaboration, they said, with standing desks and ergonomic chairs that cost more than my first car. There was a meditation room, a fully stocked kitchen with kombucha on tap, and motivational quotes etched into the glass walls. Excellence is our standard, and integrity in all things. But cracks show if you know where to look. It started with comments that seemed harmless at first. During my second week, the VP of Operations, Harold Brennan, introduced me at a meeting by saying, "This is our new risk analyst, and she's easy on the eyes too," which never hurts in client meetings. The room chuckled. I smiled, because that's what you do. Then there were the anonymous feedback sessions that weren't anonymous at all. I noticed how people's suggestions in the digital suggestion box would somehow come up in their performance reviews, twisted into negatives. Shows concerning lack of team spirit by questioning established procedures. Read one review I accidentally saw on my manager's screen. The HR department was worse than useless. They were active accomplices. Patricia Morse, the head of HR, had a habit of scheduling check-ins with female employees after they'd filed complaints. Meetings that always ended with the woman either withdrawing her complaint or finding herself on a performance improvement plan within weeks. I started noticing patterns. How emails I'd sent to my personal account about weekend plans would somehow inform Monday morning's water cooler conversation with my boss. How private Slack messages between colleagues would result in those same colleagues being separated onto different projects. How the IT department always seemed to be performing maintenance on the computers of anyone who'd spoken up in meetings. The sensation of being watched crept over me like fog rolling down from the Rockies. Conversations felt rehearsed, as if everyone knew their lines and I was the only one without a script. My manager, Janet Holbrook, would drop details into our one-on-ones that I'd only mentioned in private phone calls during lunch breaks. "How's your sister's divorce going?" she asked once, though I'd never told her my sister was married, let alone separated. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. This was corporate America, not some spy thriller. But then Thomas Chen from accounting was walked out by security on a Tuesday afternoon. His desk cleared before lunch. The official story was violation of company policy. But Sarah from his team whispered that he'd been documenting discrepancies in the expense reports. She transferred to the Denver office the next week. The building's beauty became oppressive. Those glass walls meant nowhere to hide, no private conversations, no moment of genuine human connection that wasn't performed for an audience. The mountain views from the break room windows might as well have been painted on. We were trapped in a terrarium. Pretty to look at from the outside, but slowly suffocating within. By the end of my first month, I understood the truth beneath Dunlow and Holt's polished surface. This wasn't a company. It was a carefully managed ecosystem of control, manipulation, and fear, dressed up in startup perks and corporate speak. The real product wasn't business consulting. It was compliance, extracted from employees through 1,000 small violations of privacy and dignity. And I was already in too deep to simply walk away. The first entry in my encrypted notes app was just 3 words. They are listening. I'd downloaded the app after Thomas from accounting disappeared, using 3 layers of password protection and biometric locks. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe I wasn't paranoid enough. Secret number 1 came to me on a rainy Thursday when Maria, the senior analyst who'd trained me, broke down in the parking garage. She thought she was alone, sobbing against her steering wheel. When I knocked on her window, she jerked like I'd electrocuted her. "Please don't tell anyone," she whispered. She'd been written up for taking excessive bathroom breaks, 3 times in one morning. The truth? She was pregnant, suffering from severe morning sickness, and hadn't announced it yet because she'd seen what happened to the last woman who'd gotten pregnant. Restructured out of a job at 7 months. I wrote it down that night. They monitor bathroom breaks. Maria, 3 strikes for morning sickness. Previous pregnant employee terminated at 7 months. Secret number 2 revealed itself during a mandatory team building session. We were supposed to share our growth goals for the quarter. When Jake from marketing suggested the company could grow by paying overtime for weekend work, the room went silent. By the next week, Jake was on a performance improvement plan for failing to demonstrate commitment to efficiency. The message was clear: asking for legal compensation was a career-limiting move. The secrets accumulated like snow on the Rockies, slowly at first, then in avalanches. Secret number 3. The janitor, Roberto, whispered to me one evening as I worked late. They'd cut the cleaning staff's hours but demanded the same work be completed, forcing them to clock out and continue cleaning unpaid. "But we need these jobs," he said, emptying my trash with shaking hands. Secret number 4. The anonymous employee satisfaction surveys weren't anonymous. I discovered this when my boss quoted, verbatim, a concern I'd raised about work-life balance. "Interesting perspective on burnout culture," Janet said, using the exact phrase I typed. "Very specific wording." Secret number 5 arrived, gift-wrapped in corporate doublespeak. I was tasked with analyzing performance metrics and discovered a pattern. Employee evaluations were retroactively adjusted downward just before bonus season. Not enough to raise red flags, just enough to justify smaller payouts. The Excel files had hidden columns with the original scores, digital breadcrumbs of systematic theft. "They're stealing from us in broad daylight," I typed that night, my fingers trembling, "making us feel worthless while they pocket the difference." Each secret felt like a stone added to a wall I was building between myself and this place. I became a collector of whispered conversations, of glances that said more than words, of the space between what was said in meetings and what was meant. Secret number 6. The company's mental health benefit, advertised as unlimited counseling sessions, was a trap. Employees who used it found themselves flagged as unstable in internal documents. I found the spreadsheet by accident, left open on an HR computer during a fire drill. Secret number 7. Our flexible work-from-home policy came with invisible strings. The company installed tracking software on work laptops that monitored not just productivity, but personal browsing, keystrokes, even ambient sound through the microphone. Working from home meant inviting them into your house. By secret number 8, I developed a system. Document everything. Trust no one. Save copies in places they couldn't reach. Encrypted cloud services accessed only from a personal device bought with cash. Using public Wi-Fi far from the office. The weight of these secrets changed me. I stopped smiling in the halls, stopped participating in the forced camaraderie of office birthday parties and happy hours. I became what they wanted all along, a silent, efficient machine. But unlike my colleagues, my silence was purposeful. I was building something in the dark. Secret number 9 broke me. Sandra, a single mother in customer service, had requested one day off to care for her son who'd been hospitalized with pneumonia. The request was denied. When she called in sick anyway, she was terminated for job abandonment. I watched her pack her desk, photo of her little boy face down among the office supplies, while Patricia from HR stood guard like a warden. That night, I stared at my growing list of secrets. Each one was a story of someone's dignity stripped away, their humanity reduced to metrics and efficiency ratings. The notebook had become a testimony to corporate cruelty. Each entry a small violence committed in fluorescent-lit conference rooms and glass-walled offices. My collection grew to 10, then 11 secrets, each more damning than the last. I wasn't just documenting workplace violations anymore. I was mapping an entire system designed to break people down, to make them grateful for scraps, to convince them their suffering was their own fault. Secret number 11 was personal. I overheard Janet on a call, discussing how to manage me out if I didn't become more culturally aligned. They'd noticed my withdrawal, my lack of enthusiasm for their manufactured joy. I was becoming a problem. That's when I realized I wasn't collecting these secrets just to document them. I was collecting them to weaponize them. The setup was elegant in its cruelty. Janet called it the Morrison Industries Risk Assessment, a project so complex and poorly scoped that failure was built into its DNA. She assigned it to me on a Tuesday morning with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I know you're still getting your feet wet," she said, sliding the folder across her desk. "But I think you're ready for something bigger. The client needs a comprehensive risk profile by end of week. I'm sure someone with your analytical background can handle it." The folder was thick with contradictory data, missing financial statements, and contact information for client representatives who never answered their phones. When I asked for clarification, Janet's response was always the same. "I trust your judgment. Show us what you're capable of." I worked 18-hour days, surviving on vending machine coffee and the kind of determination that comes from knowing you're being set up. My calls to Morrison Industries went unreturned. My requests for historical data were met with bureaucratic stonewalling. By Thursday night, I knew the truth. Morrison Industries was a shell company, possibly one of Dunlow and Holt's own creation, designed to be an impossible task. Friday's presentation was a public execution. I stood before the senior leadership team, presenting what analysis I could manage with fabricated data and non-existent sources. Harold Brennan interrupted every third slide with questions designed to humiliate. "Why didn't you verify this with their CFO?" And, "Surely someone with your experience knows better than to make assumptions?" The formal warning came that afternoon. Failure to meet basic performance standards. It read, "Inability to manage client relationships effectively." Janet delivered it personally, with Patricia from HR as witness, both wearing expressions of practiced concern. "We want to help you succeed," Patricia said, sliding a performance improvement plan across the table. "Think of this as an opportunity for growth." I signed it. What choice did I have? But that night, something shifted inside me like tectonic plates grinding together before an earthquake. I thought about Sandra's son, probably still recovering, wondering why mommy didn't come home from work anymore. I thought about Roberto, cleaning offices at midnight for free, too afraid to speak up. I thought about every person whose story had become a secret in my encrypted files. But, mostly, I thought about my father. He'd worked for a manufacturing plant in Ohio for 23 years, never missed a day, never complained. When the company needed to cut costs, they found a technicality in his pension agreement, a single form filed incorrectly decades ago, and used it to deny him his full retirement. He spent his last years fighting them in court, dying of a heart attack 2 weeks before the settlement that would have vindicated him. I was 12 when he told me, "Never let them make you small, Maddie. Never let them convince you that their greed is your failure." Sitting in my Denver apartment, staring at the performance improvement plan that was designed to document my forthcoming termination, I finally understood what he meant. This wasn't about me anymore. It had never been about me. I opened my encrypted app and began typing secret number 12. But this time, it wasn't something I'd observed. It was something I was going to create. The plan formed like a photograph developing in darkroom chemicals. If they wanted to play with fabricated data and shell companies, I'd play too. But I'd play by my own rules. That weekend, I did 3 things. First, I reached out to an old college roommate who'd become a labor attorney, using a burner phone and a coffee shop Wi-Fi 3 towns over. I didn't hire her. That would leave a trail. I just asked hypothetical questions about whistleblower protections and what constituted admissible evidence. Second, I began creating my own shell. Not a company, but a digital fortress. I backed up everything to servers they couldn't trace, automated systems they couldn't access, dead man switches they couldn't disarm. Third, I stopped being afraid. Fear was what they fed on, what kept everyone in line. But what could they do to someone who'd already accepted the worst? Fire me? They were going to do that anyway. Blacklist me? I'd already decided I was done with this industry. Sue me? Let them try to explain their practices in open court. Monday morning, I walked into Dunlow and Holt with a new purpose. I wasn't there to survive anymore. I wasn't there to document their cruelty for some future purpose I couldn't name. I was there to burn it all down. And I knew exactly which match to light first. The email thread appeared in my search results like a gift wrapped in corporate negligence. Someone in IT had misconfigured the server permissions during a routine update, leaving a brief window where middle management could access executive communications. Most people didn't notice. I did. The subject line was innocuous. Q4 Efficiency Initiative. The content was dynamite. Harold Brennan to the C-suite. Per our discussion, we'll frame the headcount reduction as performance-based restructuring. Legal has confirmed that if we document enough minor infractions, tardiness, bathroom breaks, personal calls, we can avoid triggering WARN Act requirements, targeting 30% reduction without severance obligations. The CEO's response: approved, focus on departments with higher salary bands. Make sure Patricia has the paperwork ready. We'll call it cultural realignment. Attached was a spreadsheet, names, salaries, and pre-written termination causes. Maria was on it. Excessive absenteeism for her morning sickness. Jake from marketing, failure to embrace corporate values. Even Roberto's cleaning crew, redundancy in service positions. My name was there too. Performance deficiencies and poor culture fit. Target date, end of month. I sat in my cubicle, heart hammering against my ribs, watching my colleagues work diligently at their computers, oblivious to the guillotine being sharpened above their necks. The sheer calculated cruelty of it, using federal labor law loopholes to rob people of their livelihoods while avoiding legal consequences, made my hands shake as I screenshot everything. But screenshots weren't enough. I needed the original files, with metadata intact, or they'd claim fabrication. That's when I remembered Roberto mentioning that the executives often worked late on Wednesdays, ordering dinner to the conference room. That Wednesday, I stayed late, waiting until the C-suite gathered for their weekly strategy session. While they feasted on catered sushi and plotted lives to ruin, I slipped into Harold's office. His computer was locked, but he'd written his password on a post-it tucked under his keyboard, a security violation he'd have fired anyone else for. The files were all there. Not just the layoff plans, but 2 years of similar schemes. Wage theft disguised as scheduling efficiency. Benefits cuts presented as plan optimization. An entire folder labeled Union Prevention Strategies that detailed surveillance of employees suspected of organizing. I copied everything to multiple encrypted drives, my hands steady now. Fear replaced by cold purpose. But as I prepared to leave, another thought struck me. They needed to know I had this. Not enough to stop me, just enough to make them sweat. I created a simple text file on Harold's desktop. Secret numbers 12. Your efficiency initiative has been inefficient. The watchers are being watched. The next morning, the executive floor was in chaos. I watched from my desk as Harold stormed between offices, face red, arms gesticulating wildly. It was called in. Security protocols were discussed in hushed, frantic tones. Janet canceled our one-on-one, then rescheduled it, then canceled again. But they couldn't find the leak. My digital fortress held. That's when I implemented the dead man switch. Using the coding skills I'd kept sharp since college, I created an automated system. If I didn't log in every 48 hours, if my company email was deactivated, if my keycard access was revoked, any disruption to my normal pattern, the entire cache would automatically upload to a list of recipients, local journalists, the Department of Labor, the ACLU, and a labor rights blog with 1 million subscribers. I left evidence of the system's existence in places they'd look, just enough breadcrumbs to make them understand the rules of our new game. A printed email about automated cloud backups left in the printer tray. A browser history showing research on whistleblower protections and automatic file distribution systems. The effect was immediate. Janet started treating me with bizarre kindness, asking about my weekend plans, complimenting my work. Harold nodded at me in the hallway, the first time he'd acknowledged my existence in months. Even Patricia from HR smiled nervously when we passed in the break room. They knew, and they knew, I knew they knew. The power shift was intoxicating. For the first time since I'd walked into this glass tower, I wasn't afraid. They were. Every executive meeting now carried the weight of my potential disclosure. Every termination they planned had to factor in whether it might trigger my system. But the best part, the part that made me smile as I sat in my cubicle, was the ripple effect. Other employees noticed the change. They saw executives flinch when someone mentioned documentation or records. They watched Harold's face drain of color when Maria returned from her lunch break 2 minutes late and he couldn't say a word. The whispers started. Something's different. They're scared of something. Did you see how they backed down from firing Jake? One afternoon, a junior analyst named David slipped me a note. Whatever you're doing, we see it. We're with you. Secret number 12 wasn't just about the evidence I'd gathered. It was about the power shift that evidence created. For 14 months, they'd built their empire on our fear. Now, with a few gigabytes of data and some clever coding, I'd turned their own weapon against them. The executives who'd once strutted through the office like apex predators now moved carefully, eyes darting, wondering which employee might be documenting their next violation, which conversation might be recorded, which email might surface. I'd given the entire office something they'd forgotten existed: hope. And that terrified Dunlow and Holt's leadership more than any lawsuit ever could. Secret number 13 fell into my lap during a voluntary resignation meeting I wasn't supposed to witness. I'd been retrieving prints from the copy room when I heard Patricia's voice through the thin wall of conference room B. Understand this is your choice, Diane. We're simply presenting options. You can resign today with 2 weeks severance and a neutral reference. Or we can proceed with the formal performance review process. I think we both know how that will end. Diane's voice barely audible. But I haven't done anything wrong. My reviews have been excellent for 5 years. Performance is subjective, Patricia continued, her tone professionally cruel. For instance, you've been seen crying in the bathroom twice this month. That suggests emotional instability affecting workplace productivity. I pressed record on my phone, holding it against the wall. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, a masterclass in corporate coercion. By the end, Diane had voluntarily resigned, surrendering her unemployment benefits and any legal recourse, bullied into believing she was worthless. That night, I added to my arsenal audio recordings of 3 more voluntary resignation meetings, each following the same script. Employees with stellar records suddenly told they were failures, offered the dignity of resigning rather than being fired for cause. It was a pattern, a system, a machine for disposing of humans while avoiding legal liability. Secret number 14 came from the IT department. Marcus, one of the few technicians who still had a soul, slipped me a USB drive during a software update on my machine. You didn't get this from me, he whispered, then louder. That should fix your browser issue, Ms. Greer. The drive contained logs showing that every confidential HR complaint filed in the past 2 years had been forwarded to the subject of the complaint within hours. Women reporting sexual harassment found their harassers mysteriously knew every detail. Employees reporting wage theft discovered their managers had full transcripts. The HR portal wasn't a safe space. It was a trap. I spent that weekend crafting my next move. The evidence was damning, but I needed it to reach beyond my dead man switch. I needed the court of public opinion. I created an anonymous email account and composed a message to Riley Martinez, an investigative journalist at the Colorado Tribune known for corporate accountability stories. I attached just enough evidence to prove legitimacy: sanitized screenshots, partial audio transcripts, statistics showing the pattern of forced resignations. The subject line: Dunlow and Holt, where efficiency means erasing employees. But I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, I printed the draft and left it on the printer, the same printer executives used. Let them find it. Let them wonder when the bomb would drop. The paranoia that followed was beautiful to watch. Emergency meetings were called. The PR firm that had been hired went into overdrive, preparing crisis communication plans. I heard Harold on a call. We need to get ahead of this, if even half of what's in that draft is released. They started making mistakes. In their panic to identify the source, they became sloppy. Emails discussing damage control were sent to wide distribution lists. A senior VP accidentally replied all to a thread about neutralizing the threat, exposing their strategies to half the company. The office atmosphere transformed. Where once there had been fear, now there was anticipation. Employees whispered in the parking garage, shared knowing looks in meetings. Someone started a betting pool on when the story would break. I heard about it third hand, which meant even the executives probably knew. David, the junior analyst, wasn't the only one who'd figured out something was happening. A quiet resistance formed. People started documenting everything, creating their own insurance policies. The woman in accounting who'd been denied promotion 3 times began openly taking notes during meetings. The sales team started BCCing personal emails on suspicious directives. I became a ghost in the machine, present but untouchable. My performance improvement plan meetings became surreal theater. Janet would critique my work while nervously glancing at my notebook, wondering what I was writing. She'd assign me tasks, then immediately ask if I had any concerns about them. Her voice pitched high with anxiety. One afternoon, the CEO himself appeared at my cubicle, Richard Dalton, a man who hadn't spoken to anyone below director level in years, suddenly wanted to check in with a mid-level analyst. "Madeline," he said, his politician smile not quite steady. "I wanted to personally ensure you feel supported here. We value all our employees." "All of them?" I asked, maintaining eye contact. "Even the ones on the Q4 efficiency list?" His smile froze. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Of course not," I said, turning back to my computer. "Will that be all?" He stood there for a moment, calculating. Then, "We're a family here. Madeline. Families sometimes have disagreements, but we work them out internally." "Some families are dysfunctional," I replied, fingers never pausing on my keyboard. "Sometimes intervention is necessary." He left without another word. Within an hour, an emergency board meeting was called. The cracks in their facade were widening into chasms. Decades of carefully managed corporate abuse was unraveling, not because of any external pressure, but because they'd finally pushed someone who pushed back. They'd created their own nemesis through their cruelty, and now they were trapped in a prison of their own making. Every move they made to contain the situation only confirmed their guilt. Every meeting about crisis management created more witnesses. Every attempt to identify the leak exposed more of their methods. The beautiful irony was that they'd trained me for this. All those risk assessments, those analytical frameworks, those lessons in identifying vulnerabilities. I was just applying their own teachings to the biggest risk of all, themselves. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. Organizational restructuring and path forward. The invitation read, "Mandatory attendance." The entire company packed into the main conference hall, a sea of anxious faces under fluorescent lights. Richard Dalton stood at the podium, his usual commanding presence diminished. Behind him, the executive team sat in a row like defendants at a trial. Harold's hands shook as he adjusted his tie. Patricia stared at her laptop screen, lips pressed thin. Janet kept glancing at the exits. "Thank you all for coming," Richard began, his voice echoing in the packed room. "As you know, Dunlow and Holt has always prided itself on efficiency and excellence. Today, we're announcing a new initiative to streamline our operations. I reached into my blazer pocket and pressed play on my phone, connected to the conference room's Bluetooth system. Marcus from IT had shown me how to bypass their security. One last gift from an unexpected ally. Richard's voice filled the room, not from the podium, but from the speakers. They work because they're scared of losing their jobs, not because they trust us. Fear is more efficient than loyalty. Always has been. The recording was crystal clear. A private conversation with Harold from 6 months ago, where they'd laughed about employee retention strategies, where Richard had bragged about keeping salaries low because desperation is a hell of a motivator. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in something worse. Absolute silence. 300 employees staring at their leadership with a mixture of disgust and validation. Everything they'd suspected, confirmed in their CEO's own words. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He looked at Harold, at Patricia, searching for rescue that wouldn't come. Someone had to speak, had to regain control. That's taken out of context. He finally managed. This is clearly corporate sabotage. I stood up from my seat in the middle of the room, heads turned, or just inconvenient truth. Madeline, Janet hissed. Sit down. Why? I pulled out a printed stack of papers. Afraid I'll share secret number 15, the one about how you've been systematically violating federal labor laws? Or maybe the spreadsheet targeting 30% of this room for termination without cause? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone in accounting stood up. Then 2 people from customer service, David from analytics. One by one, employees rose from their seats, not to leave, but to stand witness. You created this, I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. You built a culture of fear and called it efficiency. You stole wages and called it optimization. You destroyed lives and called it business. Richard grabbed the microphone. Security, escort Ms. Greer. But security didn't move. Tony, the head of building security whose overtime had been cut last quarter, crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. His team followed suit. That's when it happened. Slow at first, a single clap from somewhere in the back, then another, then more. Not thunderous applause, but steady, deliberate clapping that grew as more employees stood. They weren't clapping for me. They were clapping for themselves, for surviving, for finally seeing their tormentors exposed. Patricia tried to speak. Everyone, please, let's remain professional. Like when you told me my son's cancer was unfortunate timing for the department. Sandra's voice cut through the room. She was here. They'd hired her back as a contractor at half her previous salary. And she'd come to the meeting. Professional like that? The executive's careful facade crumbled in real time. Harold's face had gone from red to white to gray. Janet was crying, real tears this time, not the manufactured ones she used in termination meetings. Richard stood frozen at the podium, watching his empire collapse. The board will hear about this, he said finally, his voice cracking. This is corporate terrorism. No, said a voice from the front row. Margaret Chen, the CFO who'd stayed silent through every cruel policy, stood slowly. This is accountability, and the board has already heard. They've been copied on everything. The revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. He staggered, gripping the podium. Margaret continued, her voice steady. Some of us have consciences, Richard. Some of us have been waiting for someone brave enough to light the match. I walked toward the exit, each step deliberate. The crowd parted, some nodding, others reaching out to touch my arm in solidarity. At the door, I turned back one last time. Your efficiency initiative worked, I said to the broken executives. You've efficiently destroyed yourselves. The last thing I heard before the door closed was the sound of 300 people finding their voices at once. Questions, demands, years of suppressed anger finally given permission to exist. I didn't need to stay for the aftermath. My work was done. The dead man's switch would ensure the evidence reached the right people. The journalists would have their story. The Department of Labor would have their case. And Dunlow and Holt would have their reckoning. Walking to my car. I pulled out my phone and deleted the encrypted app. 15 secrets, carefully documented and deployed. Not for revenge, though it might look that way. For justice. For Sandra and Roberto and Maria and everyone else who'd been ground down by the machine. The Colorado sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere behind me, an empire built on fear was crumbling. And for the first time in 14 months, I could breathe. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of a cabin in Whitefish, Montana, watching snow dust the mountains. My laptop was closed. My phone was off. For the first time in years, I wasn't documenting anything. The news had broken 3 days after the meeting. Riley Martinez's expose in the Colorado Tribune ran with the headline, "The Efficiency Machine, Inside Dunlow and Holt's Culture of Corporate Cruelty." It was picked up nationally within hours. By the end of the week, federal investigators had seized company records. Richard Dalton resigned to pursue other opportunities. Harold Brennan took early retirement. Patricia Morse was named in 7 separate lawsuits. The company lost 60% of its clients in a month. Last I heard, they were being acquired by a competitor for a fraction of their previous value. But I wasn't following the news anymore. That chapter was closed. A few emails had found their way to me through former colleagues. Maria had her baby, a healthy girl named Luna. She sent a photo and a note. I named her after the moon because you showed us light in the darkness. Roberto's cleaning crew had formed their own company, landing contracts with businesses that actually valued their workers. David and 5 other analysts had started a consulting firm based on radical transparency. Even Margaret, the CFO who'd finally spoken up, reached out to say she was testifying in the federal case. "Thank you," her email had said. Not for exposing them, for showing me I could. I'd saved those messages, then closed the laptop. Here's what they don't tell you about whistleblowing, about fighting back, about winning. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like surviving a war. You don't celebrate. You just breathe. You sleep without dreams of performance reviews and hostile terminations. You wake without checking for retaliation. Some people asked why I didn't go to the media immediately, why I waited 14 months, why I collected secrets like weapons. They didn't understand. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was trying to survive long enough to ensure the system couldn't survive me. The 15 secrets weren't about revenge. They were about patterns. 1 incident can be dismissed. 2 can be coincidence. But 15? That's a system. That's a choice. That's a company culture that needed to be exposed not with a whisper, but with a roar. I never posted the full list online. The evidence went to authorities and journalists. But the numbered secrets, that stayed mine. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the information itself, but the fear of what information might exist. A chipmunk skittered across the porch, breaking my reverie. The Montana afternoon was crisp, clean, nothing like the recycled air of the Dunlow and Holt Tower. I'd taken a job with a nonprofit here, something simple and honest. The pay was less, but my soul was intact. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I'm starting a new job tomorrow. Scared, but ready. Thanks to you, I know what red flags to watch for. Sandra." I smiled and typed back, "Trust your instincts. Document everything. Never let them make you small." Then I turned the phone off again. Somewhere in Colorado, other glass towers held other secrets. Other employees were being ground down by efficiency initiatives and performance improvement plans. But maybe, just maybe, some of them were also taking notes. Maybe some of them were building their own digital fortresses. Maybe the next Madeline Greer was already collecting her first secret. The truth about toxic workplaces is that they rely on isolation. They convince you that you're alone, that you're the problem, that speaking up will only hurt you. But silence is their weapon, not ours. The moment we start talking, really talking, not in corporate-approved channels, but in parking lots and encrypted apps and sometimes in front of 300 witnesses. Their power evaporates like morning mist. I didn't destroy Dunlow and Holt. They destroyed themselves the moment they chose fear over respect, efficiency over humanity. I just made sure everyone could see it happening. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I thought about that line from my father. Never let them make you small. He was right, but incomplete. The full truth is, never let them make you small. And when they try, make sure you're recording. My story isn't unique. It's happening right now in offices across the country. The only difference is that I refuse to let it end with my resignation letter. I refuse to let them win by default. To anyone reading this who sees their own workplace in my words, you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, you're not alone. Document everything, build your fortress. And when the time is right, when you've protected yourself and gathered your evidence, light the match. The glass towers only look invincible until someone shows they're made of sand. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment and let's connect. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts and experiences. Your story matters too.